I stood in a $10,000 wedding gown, minutes from marrying a man who could buy the world, but I walked away. Not because I didn't love him, but because I finally loved myself more. Now he's building a church. Not for God, but for me, and I'm not sure how to feel. Before I share this crazy, messy, beautiful story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and stay till the end. You won't believe what happened when I visited that church for the first time. It was the kind of wedding people dream about, lavish, elegant, perfect on paper. I remember standing behind the grand double doors, the sound of a string quartet floating through the air like something out of a movie. Everything sparkled, the chandelier, the champagne flutes, even the guests. They were dressed like royalty, whispering and smiling, their eyes already imagining the photos they'd post and the headlines they'd read. My dress was custom-made by a designer I couldn't even pronounce, flown in from Paris, because nothing but the best had always been his rule. My makeup was flawless, not a single hair out of place. The bouquet in my hand was trembling slightly, and that's when I realized it wasn't the flowers shaking. It was me. Everyone thought I was the luckiest woman alive, and I almost believed it too. Almost. But as the doors opened, and I saw the aisle stretching out in front of me, his smile at the end of it, confident, like he'd already won, I felt something crack deep inside. My breath caught in my throat, my feet refused to move, and before anyone could stop me, I turned around. My voice was barely a whisper. I can't do this. And then, I ran. People always ask how we met. The answer isn't flashy. It wasn't some red carpet moment or a billionaire bachelor auction. It was a fundraiser. He stood out, of course, not just because of his tailored suit or the swarm of people orbiting him like satellites, but because when he looked at me, really looked, it felt like the noise around us faded. He had this quiet confidence, like he never had to raise his voice to own a room. Our first conversation was about books, not money. That alone was disarming. I liked that he asked about me, not what I did or who I knew. And when he sent flowers the next morning, an entire arrangement inspired by my favorite poem, I told myself, this is something rare. The beginning was a dream. Dinners in the sky, spontaneous weekend trips, handwritten notes in my bag. He made me feel adored, chosen, like I was the only woman on earth. But there were cracks even then, too subtle to notice if you weren't looking closely. He was generous, yes, but there was a catch. Every gift had weight, every kind gesture, a silent receipt. He remembered every time I said no, and not in a sweet way. Slowly his compliments began to sound like corrections. You'd look better if you smiled more. That dress would have been perfect if it were tighter. It was like he loved the idea of me, but I was just clay in his hands. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was passion, that all powerful men had edges, that love was supposed to feel overwhelming. But deep down, I knew. He wasn't building a life with me, he was building a world around himself, and I was supposed to fit in without making too much noise. People love to ask why I stayed so long, and trust me, I've asked myself the same question more times than I can count. The truth, it wasn't just about him, it was about me, what I believed I deserved, what I was afraid to lose, and how small I'd made myself without even realizing it. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. I mean, who walks away from someone with that kind of power, that kind of wealth? The man could pick up the phone and change lives in seconds. He made people nervous, and somehow, he wanted me. That did something to my self-worth, twisted it into a kind of currency. Like being with him proved I was valuable. And then there was the pressure. My friend smiled when he walked into a room. My mum told me not to mess this up. Strangers called us a power couple. I started to believe I owed it to everyone else to make it work, even when it wasn't working. I thought, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I just need to be more patient, more quiet, more understanding. I made excuses for things that made me cry at night. I clung to the version of him he showed the world, instead of the one who made me feel like I was slowly disappearing. But deep down, I wasn't fooled. Not really. I was afraid to start over. Afraid no one would ever love me that loudly again. Afraid of walking away from the life everyone told me I should want. I was so used to shrinking myself, I didn't even know what standing up looked like. So I stayed, smiled, performed, until the pretending started to choke me. And one day I realized, love shouldn't feel like silence. There was one moment, when everything inside me shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No yelling, no slammed doors, just stillness. We were at this business dinner, something fancy, filled with CEOs and politicians. I'd been to dozens of them by then. I knew the script. Stay poised, laugh at the right jokes, look perfect, speak only when it added polish to his image. That night, I mentioned an idea I'd been working on, something I was proud of, something mine. And he smiled at me, that practice smile, and said, "That's cute, but let's not get distracted." Just like that, in front of everyone. They laughed. I laughed too, because that's what I was supposed to do. But inside, something broke. Not because of what he said, but because I realized in that second, he didn't see me. Not really. I could have vanished from that room and he wouldn't have noticed until someone reminded him I was his fiancée. I went home that night, sat on the bathroom floor in that expensive dress, and cried silently into a hand towel. I stared at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. I looked perfect, but I felt like a ghost in my own life. That's when I knew. This wasn't love. This was performance, survival, a gilded cage, and I couldn't do it anymore. From that night on, I started preparing my heart to leave, quietly. No big declarations, no drama, just small choices, speaking less, listening more. To myself. I started journaling again, praying, remembering who I was before all the noise. I didn't know exactly how or when I'd leave, but I knew I would, not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally started loving myself, and I refused to keep living as someone else's shadow. When I left him at the altar, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought the worst thing I'd ever have to do was walk away in front of hundreds of people, tear off the veil, and disappear. But I was wrong. The silence that followed was louder than any screaming crowd. The headlines hit within hours. Runaway bride leaves billionaire groom. Wedding of the century ends in chaos. Photos of me sprinting barefoot in that designer gown were everywhere. I couldn't scroll without seeing my own face, crying, trembling, caught in motion, like I was some character in a scandal. People picked sides. Strangers had opinions about my heart, my choices, my worth. My own family barely knew what to say. Some were angry, embarrassed. Others tried to console me with words like, "Maybe it's just cold feet," or, "You'll regret this." But I didn't regret it. Not once. What I did feel was fear. The kind that sinks deep into your bones when you step away from everything familiar, even if that familiar place was suffocating you. I had no plan, no script, just space, and for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like possibility. I moved into a tiny apartment with peeling paint and no doorman. I went back to basics, cooked my own meals, walked to the corner store, bought my own flowers. I started therapy. I reconnected with friends who'd been pushed away during the relationship. Most of all, I gave myself permission to feel every messy emotion without shame. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a glow up. It was raw, slow, quiet healing. And every day that I didn't go back, I got a little stronger, a little braver, a little closer to myself. A full month passed without a single word from him. Not a call, not a message, not even a forwarded envelope from one of his assistants. I should have felt relieved, I had my space, my quiet, but silence from someone who used to be everywhere in your life. It's eerie. It felt like living in a house where the furniture's still there, but all the warmth is gone. I kept waiting for the anger to hit, or maybe the begging. I thought he'd show up with roses or grand speeches, but nothing came. Until one evening, I opened my email to find a message with no subject, just one line. "I miss you, I'm sorry, can we talk?" No name, no signature, but I knew it was him. My chest tightened. For a moment, I stared at the screen like it was some kind of trap. I didn't respond. The next day, a letter arrived, handwritten. He said he'd been thinking, praying, crying, said he understood now why I left, and he wanted to make things right. He told me he'd fired half his team, was in therapy, had sold a property we used to argue about, and still I stayed silent. Because the apology didn't change the years I spent shrinking. It didn't erase how invisible I'd felt in his world. I didn't want change in theory. I wanted consistency in practice. More letters followed. A voicemail I didn't return. Flowers I left in the hallway for the neighbors to take. Part of me wanted to run back, to believe him, to soften. But I'd worked too hard to rebuild my peace. I didn't know what he was really after, but I knew this. I wouldn't be baited back by guilt dressed as romance. Not this time. It was my best friend who told me. We were sitting on the floor of her apartment, eating takeout and watching some show neither of us were paying attention to, when she casually said, "So, did you hear he's building a church?" I laughed at first, thought she was joking. The man who once rolled his eyes whenever I talked about faith or spirit or anything that couldn't be bought. That man was building a church. "I'm serious," she said. "In your neighborhood, right near your old church. They say it's in your name." I didn't know what to do with that. I thought he was trying to get my attention with grand gestures, but this, a whole building, a place of worship, it felt absurd. It felt calculated, but also something in me stirred. So I went. I didn't call or tell anyone. I just drove past the lot one day and saw it. The foundation was still being laid, but the sign was up. Grace House, it said, and beneath it, a line from a scripture I once told him was my favorite. I stood across the street for a long time. I wasn't sure if I was furious, touched, confused, or all three. Why was he doing this? Was it for redemption? For attention? For me? Part of me wanted to scream. You don't get to use God to prove a point. But another part whispered, maybe he's really trying. And yet, I didn't go inside. I couldn't, not yet. I wasn't sure if this was love or manipulation wrapped in scripture and concrete. But I knew this much. Just because someone builds a church in your name doesn't mean they've rebuilt their soul. And I wasn't about to walk into another beautiful place that made me feel small. After that day, it was like the church followed me everywhere. People started talking, old friends, neighbors, even strangers on social media. "Did you see it yet? He's doing it for you, right? He must really love you." Love. That word started to feel heavy. Not sweet, not comforting, just loaded. Because love, real love, shouldn't need to prove itself through cement and stained glass. Still, part of me wondered, what if he's changed? What if the man who once couldn't sit through a quiet dinner without checking his phone was now building a space meant for reflection and grace? He reached out again. This time it wasn't a letter or flowers. It was a message passed through someone we both trusted. He wanted me to come to the church, not to talk, not to reunite, just to see it. No pressure, they said, but it felt like pressure, all the same. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to sit with the question. Was this about him healing, or about me forgiving? I started noticing something else too. He wasn't posting about it. There were no cameras, no interviews, no articles planted in glossy magazines, like before. Just quiet progress, silent construction. The church was growing, slowly but steadily, brick by brick. And for the first time I thought, Maybe this wasn't a stunt. Maybe this was his way of saying, I'm trying to understand what mattered to you, what I never saw before. Still, I wasn't ready. I needed to know my peace wasn't dependent on his effort. I needed to be sure that seeing him again wouldn't unravel everything I'd rebuilt. I didn't want closure handed to me like a gift. I wanted to earn it myself, on my time, in my own voice. Weeks passed. The messages stopped. The updates about the church quieted down. And strangely, I felt something I didn't expect. Peace. Not relief. Not victory. Just a soft stillness, like the noise had finally faded. I started sleeping through the night again. I began painting, something I hadn't done in years. I laughed more. Took walks without checking my phone. I started remembering who I was before all of this. The version of me that didn't edit herself for someone else's comfort. One morning, I walked past the church again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I crossed the street. The doors were open and no one stopped me. It wasn't finished yet. Scaffolding still hugged the sides, and the pews hadn't been installed, but the inside was quiet and warm, sunlight spilling through half-framed windows. No one else was there. Just me. And for a moment, I stood in the center, closed my eyes, and breathed. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood in that space that was never really about me, and I let it be what it was, a symbol, not of him or us, but of what happens when something broken is laid bare and rebuilt, honestly. And then I left. No fanfare, no dramatic reunion, just a quiet step forward, not into his world, but deeper into mine. Because sometimes love doesn't come full circle. Sometimes it's not about forgiveness or closure or second chances. Sometimes it's just about knowing when to let go and choosing not to turn back. I didn't leave the church feeling changed. I left feeling clear. And that was enough. Not because he built something for me, but because I'd already built something for myself. Something invisible, maybe, but stronger. Untouchable. Mine. People still ask me if I'd ever go back to him, if I ever think about what if. And honestly, of course I do. I'm human. There are nights when I replay it all, his eyes when I turned away at the altar, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the corridor, the silence that followed. There are parts of that love I'll probably never forget. Not because it was perfect, but because it taught me what not to settle for. It taught me that love without freedom is just control dressed in roses. I heard the church opened last month. Full service, choir, sermons, outreach programs. People say it's beautiful, and I believe them. I hope it brings someone peace. I hope he finds what he's looking for, not just from the world, but within himself. But me, I'm not standing outside waiting for an invitation anymore. I've stopped orbiting his gravity. My life isn't a reaction to his choices. It's a story I'm writing for myself. I moved to a smaller city, started a non-profit. I speak to young women now about boundaries, worth, identity. I tell them, never confuse big gestures for deep love, and never trade your voice for someone else's applause. Leaving him wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And maybe he did build a church. Maybe he did it for redemption or love or guilt. I may never know. But I do know this. I didn't need him to build something for me to believe in myself again. I did that on my own. So if you're listening to this and you're standing at your own altar of doubt, know this. You don't owe anyone your silence. You owe yourself the truth. And your truth is enough, always has been, always will be. If you felt something while listening to this, share it. Someone out there might need this story to walk away from what's not meant for them. Subscribe for more real, raw life stories. And remember, it's okay to choose you.